Hello everybody, my name is Amelia Shaw and I am going to be your moderator for today's learning webinar, which is all about using visuals to engage and inform with our special guest speaker, John Blakinger. We're just going to hang in for just a couple of minutes as a few more people are joining us. But really what I'd like to start off with really saying thank you on behalf of IAP2 USA and IAP2 Canada for joining us for today's learning webinar. This is something that we're trying to do on a monthly basis, and we gratefully appreciate you joining us and also providing any ideas and suggestions and or recommendations for future webinars. We've been really pleased with the uptake that we've been receiving on these, but we want to continue to make it better. And so we would always appreciate receiving ideas, suggestions, recommendations, anything else to make sure that we're really meeting the needs of all our members with these learning webinars. So even though I can't see all of you, I know that you're all taking it in, and I just want to say thank you. Thank you for joining us, and thanking you in advance for all of the recommendations and suggestions that you might be sending our way. And you can do that by sending it to info@iap2usa.org or info@iap2canada.ca. So info@iap2usa.org or info@iap2canada.ca. So thanking you in advance for that. So as we have more people join us, I'm actually going to hand it over to Drew at the moment, who is going to run you through sort of the housekeeping items for today's webinar, and then we'll get going with John's.
Unmuted.
Drew, over to you.
Thanks, Amelia. What you will see on there is a couple of icons. One thing that we've done is we have muted all of the microphones. In fact, I'm going to mute one more right now. All of your microphones are right now muted. If you happen to have them muted on your own, could you please unmute them, and then we can control it. We often get feedback if we have microphones that are on, especially if you're using the built-in microphone on your computer, plus the speakers there. You get a lot of echo going through the whole system. So we just solve that problem by muting everybody. Now, if you have a question, there's a couple of ways you can ask it, and we encourage interaction throughout all of this. So there's a couple of ways you can do it. There is the question box, where you can type in your question, and Amelia will see that, and she can either read the question out or ask you to ask it for yourself. And the other way is to ask it directly, verbally, by putting up your hand. There's a little hand icon there. Click on that, and we will see that you want to say something, and at the appropriate juncture, Amelia will come to you and say, Mr. Foonman, will you ask your question, or something like that. We are recording this, and this is for professional development use, and it's available for IAP2 members on the members-only portion, or also we can make it available to any non-members on the line here who have paid to be part of this. It's one of our value adds, and there also might be some links, some videos, and so forth that could be mentioned. We'll include that as well, and include some other collateral material as John Blakinger hands it over to us, and we can put that on the IAP2 websites, both IAP2 Canada and IAP2 USA. So I think that pretty much covers everything on this end, so I'm going to turn this back to Amelia now to get things rolling.
Thank you very much, Drew. So as mentioned, this will be recorded, and it will be available on both of the IAP2 USA and IAP2 websites for members within probably the next 48 hours, although we typically get it up before then. So again, thank you very much on behalf of IAP2 USA and IAP2 Canada for joining us for today's learning webinar. It's with real pleasure that I introduce John Blakinger. John had a revelation about 10 years ago that led to his current situation as founder and head of CivilSay. John began his career 27 years ago as a systems engineer for EDS and thought at the time that automation was the answer to organizational performance. But then he realized that people needed more than a tool to achieve. John started working on improving process and leading people. John has focused on team community achievement within corporations, governmental agencies, and NGOs. He has had He has held leadership positions on voluntary boards, including the Customer Supplier Division of ASQ and the Citizen Advisory Committee for Groundwater Protection in South Deschutes and North Klamath counties in Oregon. John's latest book, The Moment of O, is available on Amazon. And John, with that, I am going to turn it over to you. So John, we'll just get you to put up your screen. And there we go. We're all set to go.
Okay. Thank you, Amelia and Drew. So, yeah, I'm John Blakinger, and Teresa, my wife, is the one that's drawn a lot of the graphics that you'll see. She's actually on her way to Europe today, so she can't attend. So let's get started. So we're going to talk about visuals. And I'm going to use visuals as really visuals in video, drawings, pictures, charts, even kind of visual language. There's a lot of visual learners in the world. Most people are visual learners, and so if you can communicate in visual ways, people usually get the message a little better. And I'm going to use a specific case study with the groundwater problem that we had right here in my home area in South Deschutes County in Central Oregon. And we'll also talk about some using visuals in a visioning process. And I really encourage you to ask questions, maybe about the hows when you see some stuff, you know, how I did this or how I got someone to do this or whatever. So please ask questions along the way. And I think we have a couple poll questions. So if you could run the poll questions, Drew, that would be great.
So thanks very much, John. So we have our first poll question up. Have you used visuals in your work with communities? It's just a simple yes/no answer. So I'd encourage everyone to select the appropriate one, and we'll close it in 3, 2, 1. Drew, if you can close. And the response is, oh, quite significant, John. 84% of today's participants have been using visuals in the work with communities, and only 16% have not. So significant number with us today.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. So I hope you all will still learn something. I know we can use visuals in many different ways, and I'm hoping that you all learn something in addition. So if you could do the next poll question, Amelia, that'd be great, or Drew.
Thanks, John. So what are some reasons you don't use visuals as much as you would like? So again, just a little bit of time, and of course you can answer more than one question here. And we're going to close it in 5 seconds. So Drew, if you could close the poll. So here we go, John. Too costly at 4%, not enough time at 39%, a lack of skill or experience at 39%, a person with skills is not available at 13%, and only 4% indicated that they weren't really quite sure how to get started. So the two big ones was definitely not enough time and lack of skill and experience. So back to you, John.
Okay, super, thank you. So what I'm going to show you, my wife did a lot of the graphic recording, but I've done the video, and I have never, actually you're going to see the video muted because the sound doesn't work, so let me get to that. And I'm going to show you this video, and I did this myself. This was the first video I ever made. So for those who say they don't have the experience and the skills, you know, I sat down, and I think it took me about 6 hours to do this first video, which was mostly learning the tool. So here I'm going to show you a little clip of this, and I'll talk over it. Oh. Okay, so we have a groundwater problem in South Deschutes, North Klamath County, and it goes back really a long time ago. 1973, there was the first nitrates were discovered, elevated nitrates, which indicate septic water is getting into the groundwater, and people are drinking water right out of the the groundwater, like I said, it's about 35 feet. So there was a lot of money spent doing studies. We got a grant to do a USGS study on the groundwater, and it tested different on-site systems to see, you know, which systems were the best systems. And the real problem is that we have really shallow groundwater. At 20 feet at my house, it's 12 feet. We have sandy pumice soil, and that doesn't really filter a lot of the soluble nitrates in particular, and other soluble, water-soluble things. So there's a real concern about the drinking water in the area, and so the county commissioners passed an ordinance that required people to put in expensive on-site systems that cost about $20,000. The voters didn't like that, so they overturned it, and then the county threw up their hands and said, we don't know what we're going to do, and they handed it over to DEQ, and DEQ had a number of town hall meetings and decided to set up a committee, which I volunteered to join, and it was an advisory committee to come up with recommendations. And this is the charter that we wrote. The purpose of the committee is to provide recommendations to the DEQ on how best to protect the groundwater and prevent groundwater contamination of surface waters in the area of South Deschutes and North Klamath counties. These recommendations may impact areas beyond the boundaries of the original USGS study that they did. And I don't know that I'll read this whole thing, but basically we're volunteers and we're trying to come up with recommendations that meet the interests of as many of the citizens as possible in the area. So I'm going to stop it there and go back to the, so are there any questions about, oops.
So there are a couple of questions, John. It was why a video? At what point in time did you use the video? Was it before to educate people, or was it to report out? And first of all, why the video?
Well, one reason was I wanted to do a video, so it was a personal reason. Also, so this problem, since it started in 1973, and we had, especially with the contentiousness of the issue, there was a lot of misinformation out there, and so there was all this kind of confused information, and I wanted to get a really short summary of kind of where we are. And so I did this right at the beginning. It was about 6 months into the committee. Was a 3-year committee. It was originally a one-year commitment, but we knew that was no way that we would come up with recommendations in a year. So at about the 6-month mark, I had enough information to put this together, and the idea was to get people through that, get people to a certain point where we could then move forward. So this was kind of like, this is the history, and actually, if you watch the video, it's out on YouTube, you'll see some of the stuff that we're going to talk about in a little bit. But I don't know, did I answer all those questions, Amelia?
Yes, I think so. There was just one other quick question, and that was, how was it received?
So I put it on a website, and we actually had a survey. If you listen to the whole video at the very end, it'll say click the button to provide input. We never got a survey response. So and it is a fairly rural area. Well, it's a rural area, not super technical people, although there were people that used the website. I don't know, if you go out to YouTube, you can see the views. It's not a lot of views, but I used it at the beginning of a few meetings, and it really helped to shorten that front end part of the meeting, because you could just watch a 3-minute video and get going with what you wanted to do. I mean, what I see with complex problems is that when you have a meeting, you recap and you basically talk about the same stuff you've talked about before, and so how can you shorten that amount of time up front so that you can get to new stuff? Because it's really complex, you have to get to the new stuff, and so that was the intention of it. It was received, people liked it on the committee, and it was especially good for the committee. So when I talk about this project, there was getting the committee, which was 14 people, ended up being 9 after 3 years. And so I used all this stuff to help the committee make decisions, and then we also used it for outreach. Okay, anything else? Any other questions, Amelia?
Nope, that's great. Carry on.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So at the bottom there's a bullet. So I mentioned it's a 3 years, and when we did the charter, we had a few meetings to, actually it was a number of meetings to come up with a charter. That's not always an easy thing, but we really wanted to define what done looked like. And then we had these open meetings, and we were talking about everything. We were talking about golf courses and livestock, and that the data was bad, and there's bad science, and nitrates aren't a health problem, and pharmaceuticals are a problem, and the financial distress of the community, and cluster sewer systems, and leaking old systems, and we just bounced around from topic to topic, and it was really frustrating. It was clear we weren't going to get anywhere with that approach. So I enlisted my wife to draw this diagram to break the problem down into areas so we could focus on one area at a time. And so we did this drawing, and we broke it down into the sources of the problem, the environment, the impacts, and the solutions. And when we did this the first time, it didn't have this many items on the list. It had items that I had heard in the meetings, but what we left a lot of space. So we had this diagram with space underneath, and people in the committee would come up and put Post-its and say, yeah, we need to include this and that and this other thing. And so then Teresa then populated the rest of the list. So we used it as a working document, as well as, after we were kind of done with it, we used it to help focus conversations. And so one of the things that I really like visuals for is you can use it to remind people. So when the committee starts talking about solutions, when we're focused on sources, we say, remember we broke this into 4 pieces, and we're gonna talk about that. So it's on the list, but it's not going to be talked about now. And people got pretty comfortable with that, and we really started to work through the questions. And if you listen to the video, one of the things that we focused on is, here's a list of issues, and what are the questions around these that we have to answer. So before we can come up with recommendations, we have to know a lot. So we used this to generate questions in each of these areas, and then over the next 2 years, we answered the questions by having experts come in and present stuff, and going on tours and doing all kinds of other things, research and stuff.
So before you leave this, John, we
Yes.
have a question from Belinda, and her comment is that it's great that you engage people to inform this graphic. And from your perspective, did that support better uptake in the engagement if people were co-creating these visuals?
Yes, I believe so. And you'll see visuals so this is one of the visuals that we used that co-created. Most of the visuals that my wife drew are kind of after the fact, drawn more in a studio. So I've used them in both ways. It really does help if you can put a few graphics and even leave a lot of open space. And I'll show a visioning thing that we're doing with a Latino community here in Central Oregon that is more that. So it's a lot of open space, but there's graphics that people can grasp and understand, and they can know where to kind of add their stuff. So yeah, I believe that helps a lot. Okay, so one of the issues is that there's a lot of complex information about the groundwater, and there was well test data for every time you sell a house, and you have a well, you have to get the well tested, and that data goes to the state, and the state enters in the database, and you can extract it out in the database, and it's a big list of numbers, and it was a real problem in that Not many people had the capability of really looking at the data, and there were some people in the community that were kind of self-proclaimed experts that looked at the data and would say the data says there's no problem, and the other people wouldn't be able to look at it, so they just have to believe him. And so there was a lot of people that said, well, this guy says there's no problem, so there's no problem. So one of the key issues was, how do you make the data understandable for people so they don't have to look into tables of data? So this diagram, and this is just a cut of the chart, because this is a very small part of the area, but this is really taking the data, the well test data, and putting it on the map so people could see where their house was, where they lived. And that's, if you put up a map, everybody first goes to where am I on this map? And then they could see how the well test data, what the wells tested. And just to give you some information about the colors here, the blue means there really are no elevated nitrates, and then it goes from yellow, it goes from green, yellow, orange to red, which then goes up to red is over 10 milligrams of nitrates. And you probably don't need to know that's more than the public water standard. So when it gets up there, you're definitely drinking a lot of water that's come through a sewer system. So this really helped, and it also helped, like I said, when people saw this big map, and we created a big vinyl of it, and they could go find themselves, and so they felt a part, could see where they fit into the community and into the water problem.
So I'm just going to ask the participants a quick question. I mean, maps are now becoming very common, but I'm not sure that everyone uses them. So if you've got any experiences that you would like to share with other participants about your experience with maps, and people being able to see themselves immediately in there from a graphic perspective, please share those with us so that we, again, are not only learning from John but also learning from the other people within today's call. So if you've got some great map stories, please share them. Either put up your hand or send us a question and we'll recognize it. Thanks, John. Back to you.
Okay. All right. This is a graphic that, really simple graphic that we came up with, and actually we wrote a really short, it's a 50-page book, it's an e-book, and the point of this is, I was sitting in a committee meeting and somebody said, something hit them on the head and they went, oh, I see, this is why we need to do something, and that's where we came up with the moment of oh, and what this curve describes is how people work through an issue. And so when they first are confronted with an issue, they say, what? I don't know what you're talking about. And then the next response is almost always no. No, there is no issue. No, there is not an issue I have to deal with. Someone else can deal with it. It's not mine. And that's just a natural reaction to all the things a person has to do in their life. And so, no is an easy answer to just not have to think about it going forward. And then when you do get a little more information, you get to that point of, oh, okay, I see, I need to do something about this. This is going to impact me. And then really the next stage is the woe stage is both when you get to the O and you start looking at the solutions, and in this case all the solutions were not great. There was no great solution. All of them were going to either cost money or you were going to be drinking water that you probably wouldn't want to drink. And so the woe is also, whoa, I don't really like any of these choices, but I have to pick something. And it's also a lot of times community decisions, one of the problems is the leaders in the community have been thinking about this problem and working through it, and they come up with here's a solution. But until there's enough people that say there's a problem that needs a solution, the solution can't go anywhere. So, and we see that a lot with leaders coming in, and this was a perfect example where we had an ordinance to solve a problem, and the great majority of the people in the community didn't think there was a problem, and so that caused really all the problems that we had with this. And then once you pick a solution, you get to let's go. And so we use this. I use this with the committee, and we started, and we'd ask people where they were on the curve, and there were a lot of people, and myself, I was down to kind of no, I don't really think this is a problem, and then we spent quite a bit of time trying to answer the questions, and then the questions kind of led us up the curve.
So John, there's a couple of questions. First of all, there's a couple of examples of the maps, but let's just come back to the documents that you have up on the screen right now. It's when do you use this? How do people show where they're at? Do you ever actually have them come up to the board and put things on there so that we visually can see where people are on your curve there, and do you come back to it over time? Do you see people change their answers over time? So a couple of things. When do you use it? How do people identify themselves? Like, do they do it visually or just with a show of hands? And then do you use it over the course of a process?
Okay, that's good. So this was just kind of came about, and we just kind of developed it. So the initial time we used it was with the committee, and I drew the curve, and we were pretty far along, and so it was to get, and we put people's names on it. So people, because it was just a committee of, there might have been 10 people at the meeting, and we would just put their names. Says, okay, Judy's here, and John's here, and Robert's here, and so. And that was it. It wasn't. One of the things is, no matter where you are on the curve, that's fine. It is where you are is where you are, and it's not, well, you're not smart enough to be at this point. It's a natural flow, and not everyone does it. I mean, some people will always be at no. And so when we did outreach, which was really until probably 2.5 years into it, where we started really doing outreach, we would start the meeting with this curve, and I would ask where people are on the curve, and they would just raise their hands, and I would count, maybe not always well, because I got corrected by the crowd if they thought their group was lower than it was supposed to be. It was really helpful to do this at the beginning of a meeting, and I have got some slides later about this, but I'll just describe it now. But by drawing this curve and explaining it, it takes about a minute to explain it. And the first thing you do in the meeting is ask them a question of where they are. It really changes kind of the whole mood of the room, because usually they expect to be told things, and to be asked a question pretty much first thing, they kind of open up. And the other value, there's a couple other reasons it's really valuable right at the beginning of the meeting. Is you can see where people are, and other people in the room see where other people are. So they recognize that now not everyone thinks the way they think, and that's always, no matter, I don't know, when people come to meetings, they just think they have the answer, and that's the way everyone else thinks. And this really shows by people raising their hands that, oh wow, there's a bunch of neighbors that are at different places, and so it really helps get people kind of more open to other opinions. And the other thing is, I went to one of our first outreach meetings. We were still developing recommendations, but I would say 60% of the people were at no, and it was really no with a super exclamation point and a couple adjectives in front of no. And so that really changed the way the focus of the meeting. So since everybody was at no, there really was no point of going to the recommendations until we got people a little more comfortable that there really was a problem. And actually in this meeting at the end, they applauded what we had done. So I think it really helped people. It helped me be able to focus what the agenda was going to be. I mean, I had an agenda, and I did have people complain that we didn't spend enough time on the recommendations, but again, if you don't have enough people thinking there is a problem, talking about the solution is really not going to work very well.
Thanks, John. So I'm going to give you just a break for a second as I relate some of our other participants' experiences with maps. And this is from Trish. She said, I've used maps with a free program called Prezi. It allows you to zoom in on any area and add text or pictures to create the story with different parts of the map. So Trish, thank you for that. And she continued on to say you upload your own map to start with and then proceed from there. From David, the City of Calgary has been using maps for many years. These maps have been simple land use to sophisticated community mapping. We actually have a learning organization in this area. So David, that sounds very interesting. If you want to add more to that, that would be great, or share it with the rest of the group. And then from Mary, I use maps all the time, but there are a few keys to using a map. Make sure that the audience could understand the map on their own, that they can find themselves on the map, so really important to label street names, buildings, etc., create a legend with a north arrow and scale, and test it on someone that's not part of your team or project. Ask a friend or a parent, etc., just to take a look at it. If they do not get it without asking, you will have lost your audience. So some really valuable information there. So a big thank you to Trish, David, and Mary for sharing your experiences with maps. And if anybody else has those experiences, please continue. This is all about us learning from your experience as well. So John, back over to you.
Okay. Yeah, and the testing, the visual is a really great point, because it's so easy to get so into the information that you know it. And I know when I was doing a lot of corporate work, there was one guy I'd always go to and show him a chart and just kind of walk away and say, what does it tell you? And if he told me the story wasn't right, it's like I went back and fixed the chart so that it told the story that I wanted to, and he could understand the story without me saying anything. So that's a really, really excellent point. Okay, so after 2 years of answering questions and getting everything, trying to figure stuff out, the committee as a whole, every one of them got to the point where we need to do something. And so the next step was to come up with, what do we need to do? And so we came up with these scenarios because, when we started talking about what we need to do, it was just like going back to the beginning where everyone wanted to talk about all this super detailed stuff, and it was really hard to get anywhere because people wanted to talk about drinking water and they wanted to talk about sewer systems and all that. And so we decided to break it into these scenarios. And one of the key scenarios is the do nothing scenario, because do nothing really defines kind of your moment of, your recognition that do nothing is not good enough. And I've been to some, actually we presented this at the IAP2 thing in Bend, and I went to a session, and it was about moving bridges or something, and the do nothing was never there. And it seems like when you come to a problem, do nothing is always a possible. It also it should be contemplated. So people say, oh, okay, you're not just ramming down my throat this solution. Anyway, I'm just going to show you a couple. So the way we did the do nothing, and was really key to, or the way we did these scenarios, it's really key to describe what you don't know or possible. I mean, we don't really know. It's the future, so we don't know. We don't know things, and these are possible outcomes. And so we were really upfront because we had kind of an atmosphere of certainty. Everybody was so certain about their opinions, but they typically weren't based in much fact. But because of all the wrangling that went on, people get very postured over time when, with lawsuits and all those things. So we really wanted to be really upfront that we don't really know, but this is possible. So we laid these scenarios out. I'm not going to go through each one of them, and we put in the outcomes and the unknowns. And this really helped us as a committee. It also helped in our outreach to present it at a high level so that people kind of get the context of where we're going to go without talking about the specifics. Yeah.
So just a quick question. Apparently, PowerPoint slides are always contentious, and quite often people say you should have very little information on them, very few words, and more graphics. So a little bit of reasoning behind why you chose to create those PowerPoint slides as you did.
So we actually had flip charts with drawn pictures that had this. So I didn't take pictures of those. So and in doing the outreach, this was the simplest way to do it. So we did use flip charts, and Teresa drew some stuff up on top of it, you know, for each of the scenarios, and we had it on a flip chart. So, but then we converted it to this PowerPoint, and I think because I don't know, you know, we really didn't have much. So I used these slides in the outreach, and I don't recall getting a lot of pushback at this point because it was high level, these scenarios, and we kind of got people through what the problem is. So we had a lot more stuff about what the problem was. So this was more of a bridge to the recommendations than it really wasn't very contentious. And especially this one size fits all, this was the county solution. So when we showed this, you know, people said, well, that was really a bad solution. And so I think it was the completeness of it and the high levelness of the scenarios that I didn't get much contention, but we did use flip charts at the beginning. Okay, so outreach. So we were doing outreach as we were developing the recommendations, and that was really a key piece, is that we wanted to make it clear that we aren't. This isn't a done deal when we were talking to community members. Obviously, as we talked to people over time, towards the end, we pretty much had the recommendations defined. So over time, we were developing recommendations. We did outreach to about 200, I think over 250 people at various places. And so I was going to just kind of show you the outreach, and these were kind of the first 3 slides, and I think we talked about the curve. So we just did the curve right up front, and it depends so I could draw it on a flip chart if it was a small group, or I would show it on a PowerPoint if it was a large group. It's kind of nice to draw it when you're right there, but you know, if it's a large group of 80 people, they may not be able to see it. So we did use the flip charts, and we used the PowerPoint slides. And then this slide I just liked because it was like the second slide. Oh, well, let me say one other thing about the outreach here that I didn't talk about before. So after we asked people where they were on the curve, and we got a show of hands, then each of the committee members would speak for a few minutes on what their piece of information that they got that got them to the moment of, oh, basically what did they learn that was like, oh, we really need to do something. And what was really interesting about it is that there were 9 people, and there were 9 different reasons why they got to the moment of, oh, and by having the committee, they're just neighbors of the people that were there, describe these different perspectives of why we should do something. It really just made it, I don't know, it worked really great. It was really pretty cool. And then this slide, I just like showing this slide because it was one of the problems that we had here, and with lots of problems, is people have kind of these, it's not preconceived notions, it's the way the world was at one time, and this is just the way it is. And you know, we learn things, and so you have to adjust. So back in 1949, it's 106,000 doctors recommended Camel cigarettes, and I doubt if you'd find too many that would recommend Camel cigarettes or any cigarettes at this point. So the idea of this slide was, yeah, we change as we learn things. We as people need to change our perspective, and then I relate it to my experience as a kid cleaning out the garage. You know, we just poured things on the ground. The ground was magic, and it took care of things. So it was, you know, and so this slide also, I did it, you know, and you know, we just need to be more careful about what we're doing with our groundwater. So the final meeting was in August of 2013. We had the Deschutes County Planning Commission and the commissioners there. We had the director of DEQ from Oregon there, and the county accepted the recommendations. And so the next slide here is the final story. And we had a banner made of this. So this is really the whole story. You can see on the top here on the right is kind of a summary of our charter that was in the video, and then you kind of read it going back this way. You can see things that we did, things that we should do. There's still a lot of stuff we don't know. It's, you know, this is really complicated. Things are changing in groundwater protection and that kind of stuff. And then at the bottom, it's really the moment of O. So it's what's the problem, and then we really wanted to include all those things that people said no, there is no problem because I can't afford it. There is no problem because the data's bad. It's really fertilizer. It's really ancient buried forests, and it's really sheep herds, and we heard all kinds of reasons really rationalizing why we don't have a problem, and we wanted to include that there so that people could see that we considered these things. And then we got to the O part was, okay, yeah, despite those things, you know, this is what we learned, and this is why there's a problem. Oops. Oh, I see. Sorry. I don't like my mouse pad there, but and then the recommendations are there on the right, and it really really encapsulated the whole story of groundwater. It would have been nice to just draw this in the first week and not do the 3 years of committee stuff, but we didn't know it. So there was a group here called the Citizens Action Group, which was really behind the overturning the ordinance and throwing a county commissioner out and suing the county for this ordinance and some other things about it. And so I presented to them 3 times through this process, and the first time I used PowerPoint, and it didn't go very well. I didn't get very far. And the second time I used flip charts, and it went a little better, but I didn't get very far. And then the final time I had this graphic, this 4x6 foot vinyl graphic, and I hung it from this was in like a moose lodge. I hung it from a timber, and it was the response was amazing. Though one of the people that was so adamantly against everything we did at the end said, "Oh, I support all these recommendations." There are people that said, "Wow, I can see the whole story." So the real value of this is it is pretty much the whole story, and it allows people to kind of self-serve, so they can go. They want to go look at the recommendations and work back, or some people want to read it in a different order. And when I was presenting it, people would ask me questions about things that I hadn't gotten to yet. And so people were getting information as they needed it, instead of like a PowerPoint is, okay, here's a little knothole of information I'm going to give you now. So the response was amazing. So, any questions about that?
So John, I'm just looking to see if there are any questions regarding that one, and we haven't got any yet, but can you just where was this actually, you talked about bringing it to meetings. Did you bring it to all of your meetings? Was it available online? Like, where could people see this? And did people that were involved in this whole process sign off on it and see themselves in it as well?
Yeah, so the basis of this was our recommendation document, which is, I can't remember, maybe 20 pages. And it gets down into in some of the details of why and why not. So because it was extracted from the recommendation document that the committee signed off on, the response from the committee was total support for this as really just a different way to communicate the recommendation document that people could then grasp. We didn't have this until we were done, so we used it at the last meeting and used it. It's on the website. DQ has it on the website, so people go, they can see this. We also put it on the front page of actually the cover of the recommendation document. And I've used it since then when people are interested, or I'll bring this along and really use this to describe. We were at an EPA conference in Boston last summer, and it won the poster award or something. And so there's a video of me describing in 2.5 minutes this graphic out on YouTube as well. Did I answer all those questions, Amelia? I don't.
Yes, you did. Yep, and we've got about 12 minutes left, so we'll keep going. Thank you.
Okay. So that was using that to solve a tough problem. We're currently doing some outreach with the Latino community in Central Oregon, and just a real summary of the activities. There was a group called Bend 2030 that came up with a 2030 vision for Bend, Oregon, and they really wanted to connect more with other people in the community. So we decided to try and do something with the Latino community, which is about, I think it's almost 15% of the community is Latino. So we had our first conversation in April and in June, and we just had this community center conversation a couple weeks ago. So this is the vision document that my wife drew, and this was drawn after the fact, not on site. While the vision was being created, it was done from the website and from some other materials. And then we got there was a lot of detail about, they call them accelerators, what would make those different components of the vision occur. And again, we used the graphic, so we digitized the graphic, and then we could parse it up and use kind of icons for each of the areas. And this was a handout. This is actually one page of the handout, so we had each of the 6 items, and then we had the Spanish there, and we would engage the community in a conversation of Vision 2030. And what came out of that, before I go there, what came out of that was the Latino community really wants a community center for them. And so that's what we did on the 29th. We did a community center conversation. And so here's a picture of a graphic with a lot of space. And so we took kind of the high-level ideas of the community center that we had from a plan that the Latino community had put together, and then we had a conversation at a church, and you can see here there's people adding their input to the area. So I think having a lot of space there makes it feel like it's not complete, and so people feel willing to add things. That's it. So I have some other links here. So there's YouTube videos. If you go out to, actually, if you go to CivilSay.net, you can go to the YouTube videos if you want to look at YouTube videos. And I did a lot of YouTube videos of meetings that we had, the audio track, and then I would just put slides kind of behind the audio track and break it up so people could watch a planning meeting in 5-minute segments and focus on the areas they might be concerned with. Concept Captured is my wife's site, has a lot of different different charts that she's drawn, and here's one, for example. See if this comes up. That maybe it won't. Yeah. So she drew this, and this is really why you would use graphic recording. So this is kind of explains, you know, why to use visuals and why to use these kind of visuals. So I don't think I'm going to go through all this, but you know, it's about participation and organizing and creativity. And I think people really like the, you know, you can do infographics that are really produced, but especially in this community, anything that was overproduced was looked at skeptically. And so we really wanted it to be very much kind of down home. You know, the video that I did, you know, was clearly not going to win any kind of video award, but it was, the roughness was actually probably better than if it was overly produced. And this, you know, the natural kind of organicness of this kind of drawing really helps, especially for people that are a little skeptical of getting things rammed down their throat. I mean, it's something about this that makes people feel more comfortable.
So, David, we've got a couple of questions, so I'm going to jump in, and I'm really going to encourage people to ask more questions. This is absolutely your opportunity to delve into to John's mind for some answers. The first one's from David. You can help people access hidden knowledge such as feelings, attitudes, and patterns that are difficult to express with words by drawing together. Drawing together cuts through the culture of over-reliance on what people say and write that constrains the emergence of novelty. It also provides a new avenue of expression for some people whose ideas would otherwise not surface. And then the question, what has been your experience using objects in your facilitation engagements? So a question, sort of just the whole recognition of the importance of drawing, and then a separate question, what has been your experience using objects in your facilitation and engagement?
Yeah, so when we did the Latino conversation, we asked people to draw, right, first thing, just draw a dog or just draw something. And, you know, if you're the right brain, left brain thing, where the right brain tends to be the artist, the drawing side, and the left brain is the language side, and the right brain tends to be more opening, more inclusive, more, and the left brain tends to be more analytical. And so if you can get people jumped over into the right brain a little bit, it really opens the conversation up. It works great for visionings and things like that. As far as objects, I usually have, I like to have stuff on the table that people can fiddle around with. I know I like to fiddle around with stuff when I'm sitting in a meeting, kind of a koosh ball or something like that. But I've not used like objects that have a specific meaning. I guess we've used a talking object sometimes, although typically we have small conversations and people don't need an object for the focus of the conversation. So certainly it would be interesting to hear whether or not anybody else uses objects. I know in the work that I've done, I've used a lot of models, whether they're models of bridges or models of overpasses. So it's a 3D type of objects that people can sort of touch, see, feel, put their head around, and other things. So it's certainly in my experience they've worked, but there may be others out there that have had that experience. And you've one of the other questions was, how often do you draw together? Do you do it quite frequently? And you certainly gave one example of when you've done it, but have you done it other times? I mean, yes, I've done it other times. I don't know. It usually, there's some people that are really uncomfortable drawing. So usually, if we have papers out on the tables, we ask people to draw in the beginning, and oftentimes there's certain people that will draw, and the idea is to draw what you're thinking and what ideas, and we'll use those. At times, Teresa's just cut and pasted the drawings that someone else drew and stuck it on her chart, because there's some really good drawings and they really depict the message. So I don't know how much do I use it. I don't know. It's hard to say. Usually at the beginning, and then people kind of self-draw after that. I don't.
Great. Thank you, John. Just a couple more things. From Rena, I've used a lot of cartoons to highlight a difficult issue the community faces, but it brings in the humor and helps people connect a little faster, especially when they don't know each other. So do you use cartoons and other things as visuals in the work that you do, John?
So some could say that the graphic recording is cartoon-like, and depending on what's there, it's funny or not. So, and then I like the Camel cigarette, the doctors that recommend Camel cigarettes. That was kind of, it's not really a cartoon, but it's kind of cartoonish in its what it said, and it was, so I can't say that I go, I'll use any kind of visual. I don't know to define it as a cartoon. If it seems to set the message or get people kind of open, or a little bit of humor is definitely a good thing.
Great. So a few more questions. So I'm going to read you several of them, and then you can respond. How do you choose the visual language for particular groups? So how do you make that decision of when to bring in the various tools that you use from a graphic perspective? And then another question, and it might have been directed a little bit more at me, but when do you choose to bring models, etc., into engagements? And another comment from Cindy is, some people are good drawers while others are good speakers. How do you facilitate the difference between people in a meeting?
So if you look at the graphic recording, there's drawings and there's a lot of words, and so when we ask people to draw, they'll draw something, and then a lot of people will just write bullets and stuff. I tend to do that, or I do very kind of analytic kind of models with triangles and things, because that's kind of the way my mind works. So we don't press it to have, you have to draw something. So it allows the person to decide if they're going to draw something or write bullets or do both or whatever. So and I don't know, when you say how do I choose the visuals, or when to use them, I think you should use them as much as, I guess if you did it too much, I think that our world is so full of verbal, me talking or someone else talking, that it's hard to overdo the visuals. I guess you could. I've never felt that way, and I guess it's. I don't know. It's a hard question to ask. How do you choose? I think more is probably better, and I've never gotten to the point where people said, "Oh my God, just give me a bullet list and I'll be happy."
Thanks for that, John. And I'm going to quickly respond to the models. We would typically have brought in models if we were trying to showcase something that we were aspiring to, or the community could aspire to something. We'd bring in models to show them what they could aspire to, whether it was a building or whatever it might be. Then we've also used models throughout the process. So we show how whatever we're working on might change as a result of the input that we've received. So the model might be very base, and then as we progress through a process that we're working on, the model would change to reflect what we've heard from people, so it starts to look like what people have been telling us over time. And that's how we've used the model. So we've used it in different ways to showcase what's being done elsewhere, to showcase how we make the changes over time, and then to show an end product. So we've used models at different stages. But is there any other questions for John before we wrap up today's session? John, I don't see any more questions, so I would like to sincerely thank you for your presentation today. I know I've found value in it, and I'm sure that other people that have been participating in today's session have found value as well. This is a very interesting topic. We often get lots of requests for information, so if there's other people that are out there that are participating that would like to share more or have more ideas or how we could build on the work that John has shared with us all today, let us know. We could have a visuals part 2. But for today, I would just like to sincerely thank John. It was great on behalf of IAP2 USA and IAP2 Canada. Thank you. And again, a quick reminder to everybody, if you've got any ideas, recommendations, suggestions, please send them our way. You can either send them to info@iap2usa.org or you can send them to info@iap2canada.ca. We sincerely hope that you'll join us in August, my goodness, August, for our next learning webinar. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a terrific day. John, thank you.
Thank you.